So is it slow and steady wins the race, or is it all in? Who wins? Is it the tortoise or the hare? Really, it depends on the race. Once you figure out what the race is, then you can figure out the right strategy. And speaking of someone who has perfected the strategy, I want to introduce you to an amazing podcast host.
Hi, this is Dan Miller, host of the 48 Days podcast. A lot of you have discovered that part of doing the work you love includes a podcast. And I commend you on upping your game by listening to Podcast Guest Profits, hosted by my good friend Tom Schwab, sponsored by Interview Valet.
Now, if you've never heard of Dan Miller and 48 Days of the Work You Love, you may hear him and say, wow, he is an overnight success. And like so many overnight successes, he's put in the work for years, for decades to get where he's been. We often have to think about this when we're doing podcast interviews. There's a place for the guest storm. If you're trying to launch a book and hit a chart, to launch a course, to do something that is very time sensitive, or if you have figured out your strategy and you want to go all in, that's a great time to use the guest storm. But for most people, it's using an ongoing long-term business and brand building strategy. Now, what does this look like? This means getting out there continually on podcast interviews. Exposure brings opportunity. So it's bringing you new leads. It's bringing you new fans. It's bringing your podcast new listeners. It might be bringing you back new SEO links, the backlinks from every podcast interview. Could be bringing you more social media followers if you're looking to do that. So it's that whole idea of getting out there continually. And let me tell you a couple stories here. One was I was talking to a prospect this week, and she says, "I want to do it. Let's go out and do 2 dozen, 3 dozen interviews as quickly as possible." And I'm like, "Well, I would love to work with you, but I don't think that's the best strategy." You see, she's still trying to figure out her brand, her best audience. She's got some products that aren't coming out till the end of the year. To go out and start promoting now may be too early, right? There's no sense in doing the finale of the fireworks at the very beginning if you've got nothing to follow up that with. For her, I said, why don't we start slowly? Do a couple interviews a month. Get comfortable with this. Learn from things. Learn which audiences work best for you. You see, each podcast interview, you should learn something. You should get feedback from it, and that will help you refine it better and better. Now, you'll hear me talk a lot of naval examples here. I'm a Navy guy, graduated from the Naval Academy, and one of the phrases you'll hear me use is fire for effect. And this comes from the old naval bombardment days with battleships. And one of the things that they would do is they would take calculations, figure out where they should shoot, the wind, the curvature of the earth, all of those things. And then they would shoot. But they'd always have somebody on the ground to look and say, no, that was 100 yards left. No, that was 100 yards right. And they would continue to adjust until they got on target. Then when they got on target, all the guns would release. And that's one of the things that you can do with a brand builder strategy, right? Go out there, start to use some different podcasts, find out what works, then you can ramp it up. Often we'll have clients that will use podcast interviews somewhat like a gas pedal, right? So if they want more leads, they want more customers, they'll do more interviews. If they want to pull it back, they'll pull back. I can think of one of our clients that came back after about working 3 months with us of doing continual podcast interviews. He was doing one a week for about 3 months. And he came back and said, I need to pull back. And I'm like, what's the problem? He goes, no, I have sold out of my inventory. I need to hire a couple more. He was in the accounting firm, a couple more accountants so I can take on these new customers. So he pulled it back, didn't stop it completely, but pulled it back to about 2 interviews a month. Then after about 45, 60 days, he came back to me and goes, I need to do a lot of podcast interviews. I need to ramp up that brand builder, because now he had people, instead of hiring 1 accountant, he hired 3, and he needed to get them work. And he knew that he could do that through podcast interviews. So what wins? Is it the tortoise? Is it the hare? Well, what's the race? Are you running a marathon? Are you running a sprint? Figure that out. And I love starting with the strategy. There's some podcast bookers out there. I heard of one the other day that their plan is 52 bookings for the next year. Well, that's a great way to lock in some customers, but that's not the best strategy for everyone. So with that, start with the strategy. And I learned this from clients of ours, Sage Productions. One of their mottos is strategy first. Figure out what strategy you're trying to use, what game you are playing, and then decide what pace you should do the podcast interviews. It might be a guest storm is great for you, but it might be that a long-term brand builder is best for you. If you ever want to talk about this, you can always go to interviewvalet.com, set up a discovery call, or feel free to put a link down here. You can DM me on social messages there or social media, and I love to connect with you. What's ordinary to you is amazing to me. Our mission at Interview Valet is to personally introduce inspiring thought leaders to millions of ideal customers they could serve for the betterment of all.